I'm in Hannibal, Missouri, a place where Samuel Langhorne Clemens, or Mark Twain, known by most, spent most of his childhood. After he grew up and moved out of town, he wrote several books, most popular ones being Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Fan. Many of those characters and locations from those books were based on real people and real places from this very town. Now, I'm not going to just show you everything Mark Twain related. I also want to show you Hannibal's darker past, with murder, suicide, hideouts, and more. So join me on this adventure through Hannibal, Missouri. Alright, here we are at the Old Baptist Cemetery, labeled as the Tom Sawyer Cemetery. You know, in the story where Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn were going at nighttime, going through this old, creepy, rundown cemetery, and they witnessed Injun Joe killing Muff Potter. Well, this isn't that actual cemetery. Little history. This cemetery was established in 1837, didn't get plated until 1844, which you can see right here, Old Baptist Cemetery, 1844. Now, Sam Clemens was born November 30th, 1835. Didn't move to Hannibal till around 1839. So technically, this cemetery was fairly new. So it didn't fit the description of that old, rundown cemetery like in the books. Actually, here's a little, a little passage from the story. Pause if you like. But the reason they use this cemetery as the Tom Sawyer one is because the real cemetery technically no longer exists. I'm gonna take you to where it's at, in a way, but as you can tell, this cemetery fits the description perfectly. So I'm not even mad that this isn't the real one, because this cemetery, I've never been to a cemetery like this where it's so run down. I mean, just look at this. You got stones falling over, broken. Some can't even read this one. Can't read it. Nope. Can't read that one either. But I mean, just look at these. And actually, along that woodsy area back in there, there's even more graves. You can kind of see a grave up next to a tree over there, but I'm not even going to go in there because that's, who knows what's in there. But just look at these, all broken down. This one missing an entire chunk. But see, here's the thing too. Actually, side fact, Sam Clemens' dad was originally buried in this cemetery, but then later moved to Mount Olivet Cemetery, and we'll get to that later on in this video. But I just want to take you through this Tom Sawyer Cemetery, and you'll get to, if you ever take like the Hannibal or Haunted Hannibal tour, you'll get to come here and they'll tell you the story on, this is the cemetery that Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Fan witnessed Injun Joe and Muff Potter and all that. But again, I'm fine with it because, as I said, this fits the description so well. There's even two houses right there. There's a house right at the entrance. I don't even know why people live this close to this extremely abandoned cemetery. I wonder if even paranormal investigators come and do the dowsing rods and try to see if they can speak with anyone, because this cemetery was around for the Civil War, so there's a bunch of people from the Civil War buried here. And actually there's a plaque up here at the entrance that's got a whole description of the Civil War and everything. I don't know if it'll say some people that are buried in here, but yeah, I just want to show you guys this spot. I mean, it's just completely wild. Here's the plaque now of the Civil War. Yeah. But wow. All right, let's go to the real cemetery. All right, here we are. All right, so you're probably really confused why I brought you to a neighborhood. Well, this is actually the location for the original cemetery that was in Hannibal. It was a lot older than that old Baptist one. It went along this road. This road didn't exist. So it went down here and just one big plot of land. And it was so overgrown and forgotten that whenever they started, tearing down the trees and everything and building these houses, they didn't even remove the bodies. So there was skeletal remains all over the place. So also in the 1970s, a retaining wall, I don't know which one, but you can see there's some retaining walls over there. I'm sure there's probably some down that road, definitely down this road. But either way, one of the retaining walls broke and a bunch of bones just flooded on out. So I don't want to, walk up and down these streets because I don't want to freak too many people out that I'm filming their houses. But I'm going to take you to the final resting place for Samuel Clemens' dad. And but before I do that, actually, there's two spots I want to show you. All right, so one really short stop here. Have you ever seen the movie Titanic? And you remember the lifeboat scene? There was a woman in lifeboat, I think 6. She demanded going back and getting the survivors. Her name was Molly Brown. She also went by Margaret Brown. Or she's also famously known as the unsinkable Molly Brown. And this is her birth home. She was born here in Hannibal, Missouri. Her home is now a museum, as you can see there, Molly Brown birthplace and museum. I don't know if the museum's open right now or anything, but I know when she got a little older, she moved to Denver, Colorado, and then that house is also a museum, but that's a way bigger house because this was just where she was born at. So this empty plot of land had the Stilwell House. One night, December 29th, 1889, Mr. and Mrs. Stilwell were walking home from a party. She goes off to bed. Later on in the night, hears a commotion. Goes in the other room, sees that her husband is dead. So she's all hysterical in a nightgown and barefoot, running down the street to a neighbor's house. She gets them. They run back to her house. Eventually, the cops show up. And then a guy named Dr. Hearn, who used to live over here, shows up as well. Dr. Hearn and Miss Stilwell were frequent visitors with each other for several years. But cops think, it was attempted burglary, and they just ran out the back door and down the alleyway because they found a couple $5 bills, a pocketbook, and an axe. Several months go by. No one's arrested for this murder. So a lot of the town folk end up having their own suspicions on what was going on. Then, I'm not quite sure how long later, but eventually, Miss Stilwell and Dr. Hearn end up getting married in the house that her husband was just recently murdered in. So that really rose the red flag for a lot of people who were already suspicious on both of them because, again, they were frequent visitors with each other. And a lot of people were thinking she had an affair and all this stuff. This was all even before he was murdered. So then, obviously, that didn't do well for Dr. Hearn's career in Hannibal. So they packed up and they moved to San Diego, California. News traveled pretty fast. And granted, this is 1800s. There's no news. There's no TV. So for the news to travel from Hannibal, Missouri to San Diego, it's a big story. Every now and then they would come back in town, but it obviously didn't do that well for them. And at some point, they end up getting a divorce. Well, obviously, the house is no longer here because it got demolished in 1970, I believe. But there is one piece of the house that does still exist. And that is the mirror that was in the front room, which is now down on Main Street at the Haunted Hannibal Museum. It's So on display, they have like pictures of Mr. Amos Stilwell was his name. Mr. Stilwell, and then a little description on the house, but the mirror is probably the coolest part. There's all kinds of cool stuff in that museum, and we'll be going and getting some snippets of that later too, but let's head over to the cemetery real quick. All right, I made it to Mount Olivet Cemetery, and just before I show you Samuel Clemens' father, his mother, and some of his siblings' grave, I know you're probably gonna want to see this one. Good old Injun Joe. And as you could read from there, he denied that he was the Injun Joe in Mark Twain's writings. That's because this Injun Joe was actually a really nice guy, where the one in the stories are obviously he's a murderer. He's just not nice at all. But I wanted to show you guys that one because actually from there, on the other side of this tree here, I don't know, maybe a good 40 feet, is where we will find Samuel Clemens' family. Sam's not here though. He is actually buried, I believe, in New York. I could be wrong, but I know he's somewhere, I believe, around the East Coast. All right, after a really short walk, I don't know how well you can see here, but there's a dark tan-ish stone, and then the darker one is Injun Joe. And right over here, we have a couple of Sam Clemens' siblings. We got Mary Clemens, Orion Clemens, Henry Clemens, Jane Clemens, his mother, and his dad's final resting spot, John Clemens here. And this is where he ended up after it got taken out of the old Baptist one that we went into earlier in this video. So here we are at Mark Twain's cave, discovered in 1819. Now, I don't think I'll have time to, go explore the cave and do the tour or anything, but I'm gonna go sit over on this bench and tell you a little history on this cave and its many different names and visitors. So as you can see, the cave was founded in 1819. And that was by a guy named Jack Sims. One night he was out hunting and he stumbled onto some panther tracks. So he followed them and he saw they went to a hole on the side of this hill. Since it was dark, he didn't have a candle or anything. He next day grabbed his brothers and a friend. They went back and they got to this hole, had candles. They go in and they notice ceilings are huge and there's passageways beyond passageways. So they noticed it was a cave and everything. So he was pretty much the founder of it, and so the original name was Sims Cave. It had about 2 or 3 other names since then, but no big stories up until this guy, Dr. Joseph McDowell. He was from St. Louis, but he frequently visited Hannibal, and so he bought the cave in about 1848. And at this point, this is when Samuel Clemens is around a young preteen or teen and everything. So he's always roaming these caves with his friends, and they go down a passageway they've never been to. They stumble onto this case and they realize something's hanging inside it. So they pull this thing out and they put the candle right up to it, and they noticed it was a little girl. So they screamed and ran out. And come to find out, not only has this body been in there for quite a few years, but it was Dr. McDowell's daughter. She died in 1850, and he successfully preserved her body, and since he was a doctor, he wanted to do all these experiments. So what better place to hide a dead body than in a cave? I don't know how many days, weeks, months, whatever went by. Something At some point, her body was finally removed and she was brought out to St. Louis at the Bellefontaine Cemetery, where she's laid to rest with the rest of her family. And so then that's when Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, is, he's writing these books on the adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and he mentions these caves a lot in the books. But in the book, he called it McDougal Cave instead of McDowell. And then obviously we know what happened. The books got extremely popular. Cave gets renamed to Mark Twain Cave. One other person who used to explore these caves was none other than the infamous outlaw, Jesse James. This was actually one of his many hideouts all over the United States. What was it? They found his signature, and it was also dated 1879. And now I'm talking about signatures. There is hundreds of thousands of signatures in these caves. They stopped counting, but when I did the tour last time, they were saying I think they stopped after 100,000, or it was a couple 100,000 they stopped counting. But anyway, it wasn't until July 26th of 2019 that they finally found Samuel Clemens' signature. That's crazy. It took that long. This cave has been around since the 1800s, and I could be wrong on this. It was, I think, somewhere around the 1970s is when they stopped, when it became like a national cave or something, where you can no longer put your signature on these walls. Like if you did, you would get fined, kind of thing. I don't remember, national cave, national park type of thing, something like that. And when I did do this tour last time, they have it all like boxed off and lit up and everything, but it's actually fairly close to the entrance of the cave that they take you to. Like you'll see the spot that Jack Sims entered, and then just below that you'll get it might have been like the man-made entrance. I don't remember what they said. It's been a while since I've been here. But yeah, not far in is where good old Sam Clemens' signature was finally found. The location we're at now not only has a beautiful view of downtown Hannibal, you might even be able to see the lighthouse off in the distance over there, but it also comes with not one, but two tragic stories. The name of this location is called Lover's Leap. Here's the reason why. These two Indian tribe members, quick little story thing. The story kind of varies, so I'm just going to give a quick, simple one. Two tribe members from completely different tribes, so it was against the rules to date outside of the tribe. So they obviously didn't care. They wanted to get married. They got chased up here, and they were destined to stay together for the rest of their life. Well, they kind of did when they went to the edge of this little cliff and jumped off. And I mean, that's a hell of a drop. But that's how this little location got the name Lover's Leap. Now the second tragic story is about these three boys. So the story goes back in 1967, they told their parents they were going to go explore one of these caves. Next thing we know, no one's ever heard or seen from them again. So no one knows if they even made it to the cave, or if they did it collapse on them, or did they change their mind and go somewhere else? We don't know. They spent years searching the caves trying to find them, couldn't find anything. Then a couple years ago, a local author decided to write a book, and that book may have changed the case. So the first book is called Lost Boys. It pretty much goes into further detail than what I've already done, and shows pictures of them searching the caves and the woods and everything. Then after the first book came out, the author got contacted by 3 different psychics at 3 different times saying, we know where the boys are and who's responsible. After the first psychic confronted him about it, he was very skeptical, And then the second one came around. He didn't mention anything about the first one. And she took him to the same place, said the same name. Third person, same thing. Same place, same name. So he was very, like, confused and shocked by the whole situation. So then he ended up writing the second book, Souls Speak. And the name that the psychics end up saying happens to be someone we've all at least heard of, maybe once. That name is John Wayne Gacy. Now, I know he did most of his killings in, was it the 70s? But in 67, he lived in Waterloo, Iowa. His mom lived in Arkansas. So he would frequently go through Hannibal, to and from his mom's house. So there is a very strong chance that he might have actually been a part of this, and this might have been one of his very first killings. I don't know, but hopefully they get some type of answers. Obviously we can't ask John Gacy, he's no longer here, but maybe if they decide to dig in this area, hopefully they'll, you know, find some type of remains. But in the meantime, let's head back into town. This is the bottom of Cardiff Hill, and as you can see, there's a statue of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Fan. The reason for that is because when Sam was very young, him and his friends absolutely loved playing on this hill. He liked it so much that whenever he was writing the stories for Tom and Huck, he featured this hill in many of them. Now at the top of this hill is the Mark Twain Memorial Lighthouse. And we will be going up to that lighthouse, but first we gotta climb all 244 steps. It doesn't look like a lot right now, but it's stairs, landing, stairs, parking lot, stairs, lighthouse. I'll see you at the top. Whew. All right, so we've officially made it to the home stretch. Man, that was a workout. All right, so this actually isn't the original Mark Twain Memorial Lighthouse. The original got knocked down in a windstorm in 1960, and then got rebuilt, and then I think also at one point repainted as well. But a cool little fact about this one is on Mark Twain's 100th birthday, President Roosevelt pressed a button from the White House to light the lighthouse. And then what was it, President Kennedy did it later on. Then after that, President Clinton. I am not quite sure on if any other presidents since then have lit it, but even at nighttime they light this thing. Only at the top though. Yesterday it was like purple and pink or something, but here's a little description on some of the history. Move my hand out of there. There it talks about 1960, the windstorm. Whew. All right, but my favorite spot is these views from up here. There's the Mississippi River. All right, I'm gonna get up here. So I'm not quite sure if you can see off in the distance, but over here, there's a flag. You probably can't see it, but that is Lover's Leap. Here's Main Street. Be nice if they can trim down some of these trees off in that close distance here, so you can see Main Street a little bit better. Whew. All right, but it is time to go back down all these steps. So see you at the bottom. If you've ever read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, you know that Huck befriends a slave by the name of Jim, and Jim tries to escape slavery and builds this makeshift raft and floats down the Mississippi, and Huck decides to join him. Well, Jim is an actual person, and he worked on Samuel Clemens' uncle's farm back in Florida, Missouri, where Sam Clemens was born before he came to Hannibal. And this is Jim's house here. You can actually see there's a little painting of Huck and Jim on the raft. but they turned the house into an actual museum. So head across the street, and right over here we have Jim's Journey. Then right over here we have Tom Blankenship's house, also known as Huckleberry Fan. As you can see right here, I'll see if we can get close to. This is part of the Mark Twain Boyhood Home Tour. I won't be able to access it from this view, but you can kind of get a little synopsis of it. Yeah, if you're ever in town, I highly recommend doing the Boyhood Home Tour. Alright, we have made it to Sam Clemens' Boyhood Home. It's a little windy right now, so hopefully you can still hear me. But over here we have Tom Sawyer fence, and we all know how that story goes. A young Tom Sawyer was supposed to be painting the fence. He got bored, did not want to do it, so he convinced the neighborhood kids to do it. Then across the way, we have Becky Thatcher's house. So Sam Clemens' childhood sweetheart, her name was Laura Hawkins. So when he wrote the stories, he made her character Becky Thatcher, and that was also Tom Sawyer's sweetheart. Then over here, we have the J.M. Clemens Justice of the Peace. This is Samuel's dad's law office, and the building was somewhere else and then got moved down here for obvious reasons. But I got a little wild story here. One night, Sam Clemens climbed in through the window to take a nap. He was laying down on a bench, and he saw something was on the ground, but he couldn't tell what it was. And then at one point in the night, the moon hit the right spot, shined the light right through, and he saw it was a dead body. So he done booked it on out of there. Here's a little story on it. Then over here we have Grant's drugstore. Sam's dad actually died on that top floor, and there was one time where I don't know what year or how old Sam was at this point, but he witnessed someone get shot and then dragged into the store, and it took that person like 30 minutes to die. So Sam's had quite a few run-ins with dead bodies, obviously, because I even talked about the one over at the cave earlier. But here's a little history on the drugstore. Alright, now we're taking a stroll down Main Street. This area is filled with restaurants, gift shops, museums, even has its own little general store. Some of the places are closed right now, and some are getting ready to close, but you absolutely cannot go to Hannibal without visiting Main Street. All kinds of shops over there. Here's where you do the Hannibal tour. You ride in a trolley. You got Wayne's Barbecue. This is another little restaurant, but it's closed. That colorful building over there is Java Jive. It's a coffee shop / gift store and has a huge old lounge on the side. Here's one of the many paintings that are scattered throughout town. This is the Haunted Hannibal Museum. I showed you a little bit earlier. They also give ghost tours. Let's go inside before they close. We are inside now, and I already showed you a clip of the Stilwell mirror. But here's a section on Molly Brown that we also talked about earlier. Here's the whole story on her childhood, a picture of the Titanic, her famous nickname, the unsinkable Molly Brown, and even a picture of her as well. In this room we have 16 of some of the most famous scenes from some of the Tom and Huck stories. They're just built in little dioramas. The detail, jeez. This is the graveyard one. It's a little hard to see though.
Let me just get around here so I can show you the rest. I mean, these things are amazing.
If you're looking for all things Mark Twain related, this is where it's at. All kinds of books, movies, documentaries, and it also has the Norman Rockwell Museum. This antique store has 2 floors, and it'll probably take you an hour to an hour and a half just to look at everything. The street runs about maybe 5 or 6 blocks, but a good 4 blocks of it is where all the good shops are. Here's like a little clock store. You can kind of see people hanging out in the lounge here at Java Jive. I think they're getting ready to close here pretty soon. Over there's where you do the trolley tour like I showed you earlier. I mean, here's some other knick-knack stores. They even have quilt stores. There's pretty much something for everybody on this street. Now this place is where it's at. The general store. You get free ice cream, free coffee. The candy by the pound is only like $4.99. And here we are, back at the beginning. So I'm really hoping you kind of learned something from this video. But don't worry, I haven't even scratched the surface on the history of this town, especially this street alone. I could probably come back and do a follow-up video at some time in the near future. But until then, see you next time, Hannibal.